Welcome to a Friday night edition of Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. My voice is slightly croaky today, but I think I'm going to be able to get through the show. And I'm joined to help me through the show by Aaron Bastani. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing all the better, Michael, for an especially sultry host on tonight's show.
Exactly. It's not actually that there's anything wrong with my throat. This is just the voice I put on to try and make this all a little bit more sensual. Coming up later tonight, the first person to post key misinfo on the Southport murders has been named. Farage support takes a hit after he flirted with the rioters, and Jeremy Corbyn is set to form a new group of MPs. The independent group has already been taken, of course. I'm not sure what they're going to call themselves. As we're speaking on Friday evening, it remains unclear whether or not the far-right riots, which have terrorised England over the past week or so, have yet come to an end. But the fallout concerning how this was allowed to happen is well underway, and very much in the firing line is social media. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has called for the government to review the Online Safety Act. He told The Guardian this: "The way the algorithms work, the way that misinformation can spread very quickly and disinformation, that's a cause to be concerned. We've seen a direct consequence of this. I think what the government should do very quickly is check whether the Online Safety Act is fit for purpose. I think it's not fit for purpose." And the Online Safety Act became law last October. It gives Ofcom the power to fine social media companies up to £18 million or 10% of their global turnover if they fail to take robust action against content inciting violence or terrorism. Now, of course, it's not obvious to me how you'd get Elon Musk to hand over 10% of Twitter's global turnover. So one presumes he would refuse to pay, then there'd be a standoff as to whether the government would ban Twitter or not. So it seems complicated how this could all work. On the question of social media, Keir Starmer said this on a visit to the office of the Metropolitan Police.
In relation to online and social media, the first thing I'd say is this is not a law-free zone. And I think that's clear from the prosecutions and sentencing. Today we're due sentencing for online behaviour. That's a reminder to everyone that whether you're directly involved or whether you're remotely involved, you're culpable and you will be put before the courts if you've broken the law. And so that's happening today, that sentencing. I do agree that we're going to have to look more broadly at social media after this disorder, but the focus at the moment has to be on dealing with the disorder and making sure that our communities are safe and secure.
So Keir Starmer there wanted to focus on people being sentenced for breaking existing laws, not new laws. People sentenced today include Jordan Parler from Leeds. He was arrested for sharing on Facebook, "Every man and his dog should smash the F out of Britannia Hotel." That's a hotel in Leeds housing asylum seekers. This was the judge issuing Parler's sentence.
"You have been committed for sentence, having pleaded guilty to an offence of publishing written material which is threatening, abusive or insulting, intending thereby to stir up racial hatred. The sentence that I pass has been reduced by 1/3 to reflect your guilty plea. The sentence is one of 20 months imprisonment. You will serve up to 1/2 of your sentence in custody before you are released on licence. If you fail to abide by the conditions of your licence, you can be returned to prison to serve some or all of the remainder of the custodial term. The victim surcharge will apply, and I will make a collection order. Please take him down."
It's interesting actually listening now. It's obviously just a clip of the sentencing because it takes quite a while, but listening to the whole thing, one thing that really stood out to me is the post had 6 likes, right? It's kind of sad, right? This was on his, I mean, clearly this is incitement and clearly this guy should be found guilty, right? Saying every man and his dog should smash the F out of Britannia Hotel. And when that's a hotel housing, or when it's any hotel, but when it's a hotel housing asylum seekers, he's saying it for that reason. That is obviously incitement. He's obviously guilty. And I think in the circumstances, I can see why they're handing out these custodial sentences, which are meant to deter other people. But it's almost quite pathetic, isn't it? Really going to jail for a post with 6 likes. Someone who has been arrested but not yet charged for their social media activity is Bernadette Bernadette Spofford. Spofford is accused of being the first person to share a false Muslim-sounding name as the suspect in the tragic murder of 3 girls in Southport last week. Ms. Spofford is the managing director of a clothing company and lives in a £1.5 million farmhouse in Cheshire. She is also a prominent campaigner against lockdowns and net zero climate schemes and had tens of thousands of followers on X before she deleted her accounts. This wasn't just any old person using Twitter. She told the Daily Mail this: "I'm mortified that I'm being accused of this. I did not make it up. I first received this information from somebody in Southport," who she hasn't specified, by the way. "My post had nothing to do with the violence we've seen across the country, but I acknowledge that it may have been the source for the information used by a Russian news website." So she's there claiming she's mortified and her post had nothing to do with the violence. Now look at the actual wording of her tweet, which was sent, as we say, to 10,000 or tens of thousands of people to decide if you have any sympathy for this woman. So she said, "Ali al-Shakati was the suspect." It's completely false. "He was an asylum seeker who came to the UK by boat last year and was on an MI6 watch list. If this is true, then all hell is about to break loose." I think sort of tweeting that and saying, "Oh God, how this has nothing to do with violence. All hell will break loose." Oh, I don't know. Aaron, what do you think about this? We're seeing, obviously a strong campaign from Keir Starmer to sort of say, his political message: if you take part in these riots, you're going to go to jail. If you tweet and incite these riots, you're going to jail. We're seeing the first people who are getting their sentences. What do you make of it?
Yeah, online behavior is very real. You're publishing statements that thousands or even millions of people can see. And I think often for people who aren't familiar with this stuff and who get caught up in it, as is clearly the case with that man who's been sent down for, like you say, a post which got 6 likes, is they don't think it's real. Because you're tapping away at a phone or at a computer, they don't think it's real. I think there's also a case to be made for more prominent accounts being treated more harshly. We know this also from libel law. There was Sally Burker at the time libelled Lord McAlpine more than a decade ago. And part of the judgment there was that she was a significant account. Of course, that's civil law, not criminal law. But there was a sort of, there was a judgment made that she was a significant account. I believe at the time it was something like, "You're significant, you have more than 5,000 followers," or something like that. And I think there has to be a specific kind of treatment for large follower accounts. What I say with the Spoforth account, and she of course qualifies for that, she had tens of thousands of followers, is that, the content of her tweet isn't a million miles away, Michael, from what Andrew Tate and even Nigel Farage were sharing. She adds a little caveat in there: all hell will break loose. You could just say that's just speculation. That's something, she's not egging it on. She's not inciting it. Clearly, I think Andrew Tate's tweets actually fall into a much harsher category than that. And Farage's tweets, Mike, I mean, my goodness, it really is touch or go. So I think there's a lesson here, particularly for big follower accounts, to not just take the piss, frankly. And we've seen one of those accounts, Lawrence Fox, be quite, how can I put this, dovish in the last few days, possibly because he expects a knock at the door. And frankly, he should. You can't just egg on mass public disorder and expect no consequences when there are literal pogroms happening. People are setting light to hotels with people inside them. That is a serious offence. And if nothing else, this will be an opportunity for the public at large to grasp that this is nothing to be taken lightly. Just because you're on a computer rather than screaming it in the streets or distributing literature, it's just as real, and it's just as, I think, liable to receive a very heavy punishment.
Let's talk about, I suppose, the policy question here and how to deal with the platforms as opposed to just people posting. And a problem with, I think, Sadiq Khan's call to update the online safety bill is that it's only been law since October, right? So lots of its powers aren't yet in effect. It takes a while to find out what the consequences of a law will be after it comes into statute. It's 303 pages long, took more than 7 years to draft. So I'm not sure at this point we can say, well, because this riot has broke out, we've got to update the law. It might be worth sort of seeing how the law beds in, as they say. There's also a tech journalist who thinks the UK already has laws that could be used to improve at least one platform, Twitter. So this is James Ball in The Eye. He's written this: Elon Musk has gone too far. The UK has laws which can stop him. In the article, James Ball lays out how the owner of Twitter has directly fanned the flames of these riots by boosting misinformation. You'll know this already, I'm sure. And he says this: the UK government seems to have been caught out by this admittedly unprecedented occurrence. Peter Carl, a minister in the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, pulled in staff from the different social media networks for a conversation on tackling inflammatory posts and those containing misinformation. This is a routine response in such situations, and a representative of X was in attendance. That might make sense as a first response to YouTube, Facebook, or other networks where the problem is possible negligence or a lack of resources. It makes no sense for X, given that the site's owner has involved himself in the controversy. So that makes sense. Normally in this situation, you're saying, Facebook, YouTube, you haven't been strict enough. We want you to sort of clamp down on these people who are irresponsibly using your platform. Now, if the owner is one of those people irresponsibly using the platform, you're in a very different situation. James Ball goes on to say it would be wrong for free speech reasons to shut down Twitter. Obviously, it's used by thousands, millions of Britons even for legitimate purposes. Then he says this: the government and authorities should instead look to Musk himself. Musk has crossed the Rubicon, and the government should make that clear. If he is fanning domestic unrest, we have laws relating to that and powers allowing it to take action. These range from travel bans to sanctions or possibly even criminal prosecution. Musk might be the world's richest man, but he is still just a man. Perhaps it's time for the UK authorities to remind him of that. Aaron, does that argument make sense to you? I can see where it's coming from. I mean, again, I think with Elon Musk, probably if you give him a travel ban to the UK, he'll just say, well, fine, I won't come to the UK. I don't like the UK anyway. I mean, can the government sort of go directly for Elon Musk? Obviously, I think we all agree that he has crossed a Rubicon this week, sharing misinformation. He always does this. He finds sort of the most inflammatory, big far-right accounts and then underneath just replies with 3 exclamation marks. So he obviously hasn't said anything. He's just given it a massive boost because he's got 168 million followers, the most followers on the platform. What do you think can be done about Elon Musk and Twitter?
Well, I don't like to correct you, Michael, but I think at the last time of looking for me yesterday, I was 193.2 million. I'm sure it's gone up since then. So, yeah, it's a lot of people. It's almost 200 million accounts follow him. Of course, not all of those are real. Elon Musk is arguably the most influential, most powerful person on the planet. He's worth more than $200 billion. He owns X, as well as being the most followed account on it. He's also the primary shareholder in one of the largest private companies in the United States. That's SpaceX. It is not a publicly listed company. And of course, one of the things that SpaceX is involved in is Starlink. About 6,000 satellites are in operation above our heads as we speak, providing a space-based 5G internet. The plan is to make that tens of thousands of satellites. Now, I personally think it's unwise to allow such an individual, or any individual, frankly, even if they were very good, even if I thought they were lovely and I agree with everything they said, I think it's very dangerous to have an individual with that concentration of power with regards to media, with regards to infrastructure. But the fact it's Elon Musk, I think is particularly dangerous. Bear in mind, this is somebody who said, I think it was in the case of Ecuador, you'll correct me if I'm wrong about this, Michael, and lithium, he would say jokingly on Twitter, or X, but Twitter at the time, we will coup who we want. Who's the we? Well, presumably it's the United States. And who's the rest of the we want? Who are the targets? Who are the victims? Well, it's presumably countries which aren't the United States, which would include the UK. This is somebody who has a complete disinterest, a complete actual disrespect for the rule of law and the sovereignty of other countries outside the United States. One might even say the US too, but park that for a moment. And so I think given that context, given his power, given all the resources at his disposal, as I just listed, and given his conduct in the last couple of weeks, I think we need to think long and hard, actually, Michael, about how we treat this. It's very serious. People can say he has free speech, his right to free speech. He is a very powerful person, and alongside the things you listed, he shared yesterday a completely made-up Telegraph article. It was made up. It was completely fake, right? Any social media site worth its salt would obviously have moderated that. I know there's the community note, but I mean properly moderate it. You don't get to post for 7 days or something like this. He has 193 million followers, and he in no way behaves accordingly. So I think he should be punished. Of course, the elephant in the room here, Michael, is Trump. If Donald Trump doesn't win the presidency next November, I suspect Elon Musk is going to start facing a lot of political problems, not just from the UK, but elsewhere too. If I was Keir Starmer, I wouldn't want to start a bun fight with Elon Musk right now. If you're thinking strategically, I'd probably talk to Meta, I'd talk to Alphabet, I'd talk to other European heads of state, and I said, look, this guy is not helpful. He's not helping, actually. He's making life hard for everybody. He's undermining, arguably, the rule of law in my country. So I think that would be my next step, and then I'd wait for the presidential race in November. Of course, if Trump wins, then Musk has arguably a measure of impunity with all of this. If he loses, that could be very, very serious for Elon Musk. I was about to call him Elon Trump. He might as well be.
You got to correct me there. I don't know where I got 168 million from. He does have 193 million followers. I also get to correct you on one thing. So as you say, I mean, you invited me to correct you, didn't you? It was Bolivia, where Elon Musk said, quote, "We will coup whoever we want. Deal with it." Bolivia has lots of lithium reserves. You mentioned this tweet, Aaron. I'm just going to get it up. Elon Musk tweeted it. And what you didn't, it was from a Britain First member, right? So Ashleigh Simpson BF. That's Ashleigh Simpson, Britain First. And she's shared this fake Telegraph headline, as you say. The headline said, well, the fake headline said, Keir Starmer considering building emergency detainment camps on the Falklands Islands for rioters. And Elon Musk shares it with, detainment camps. Oh, they're even using the phrase detainment camps now. No, they're not, because it's a made-up headline by someone from a far-right party, right? No one with any knowledge, by the way, of Britain would share anything from a Britain First account. But Elon Musk seems very, very keen to get involved in the politics of this country, as he was to get involved in the politics of Bolivia, saying he can coup them if he wants. Of course, I think because of the nature of Elon Musk and because so many journalists use it, is Twitter, or X, which has gained the most attention for its role in the riots we've seen over the past couple of weeks. But it's actually a different platform which has probably been the most influential and consequential when it comes to the organization of those riots. And that's Telegram, right? So Telegram, it's a messaging app which is a bit like WhatsApp. You can make broadcast channels for up to 200,000 people. And according to Politico, they've got an article on Telegram. They say this: channels set up on Telegram following the killing in Southport amassed tens of thousands of members and were used to mobilize far-right rioters. Locations shared on the app were targeted for widespread violence and the destruction of property, including a mosque in Southport. Now, Politico report that some of the most egregious channels, so including one called Southport Wake Up, which had 13,000 members, have now been shut down. But according to Politico, that's very, very unusual for Telegram to completely delete channels. It's not something they usually do. And Politico say this is only something that is usually done on the advice of the security services. So they say an example of this in the past was Europol's day of action against ISIS-linked accounts in 2019, where an absolute ton of ISIS channels were pulled down. That's according to Tim Squirrel, Director of Communications at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. ISIS is obviously still around on Telegram, but it's not as big, he said. Which is quite interesting for sort of a social media platform to say, we have some ISIS members on there, but not that many. The platform has been accused of being much more relaxed, though, when it comes to letting far-right communities thrive. So a former senior police officer involved in counter-terrorism enforcement told Politico this: frankly speaking, if a brown person says something horrible, Telegram will be all over it. If a white person says it, I'm not sure they would be. Telegram was founded in 2013 by Russian billionaire brothers Pavel and Nikolai Durov, and the app's headquarters are legally in the British Virgin Islands. We're responsible for a lot when it comes to those tax havens, but it operates out of Dubai. Apparently, and this really surprised me reading this article, Telegram employs less than 12 moderators. That's compared to the 15,000 that work for Meta. I mean, I find it very interesting with the whole Telegram Signal thing, because I used to be, in much more activisty circles than I am. Obviously now I'm a massive reformist, just bog standard social democrat, whatever you want. But I used to be much more activisty, and it was always sort of in those circles sort of talked about how fantastic it was that you had these platforms such as Signal or Telegram, which didn't have a back end, which it was very, very difficult for the state to be able to infiltrate and moderate. And I suppose it's much more now right coded to say that it should be a wild west and these things shouldn't be regulated. Whereas it used to be, I think, a bit more left coded to say, it's really important actually that the government does stay away from these platforms. Aaron, what do you think about the Telegram issue? Obviously, sort of, we know more about Twitter because we're on it. But it does seem like Telegram has been more influential when it comes to actually the practical organisation of the riots that we've seen over the past couple of weeks.
Telegram's a fascinating one because, it was created by a very clever Russian man who was also one of the people behind VK, which was the Russian version of Facebook. He starts Telegram, and he's had many disputes, or a number of disputes, with the Russian state in terms of the ability of people to use it outside of the control of authorities in Moscow. So, it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose Elon Musk could say, look, Britain's clamping down on Telegram, who've also had problems with Putin. See a pattern? You could say that. And your point about the left and right coding is really fascinating. It's something we've talked about really from the start of these riots and this disorder and this political violence in the last week, is how, again, you can make an argument. People were saying in 2011, a riot is, the voice of the unheard, as long as I agree with them. If I don't agree with them, of course, it's entirely legitimate, horrific, unacceptable, crush everybody. Obviously, there's a little bit of truth to that. People will generally defend riots, or they'll legitimize riots when they're trying to legitimize, or they agree with the perceived things that have catalyzed them. But I do think that what we saw, particularly in Rotherham, I mean, that was really, really striking. Attempted murder, frankly. I think they'll be charged with arson, with attempt to cause harm to human life. That's also, by the way, a potential life sentence, but it's attempted murder. What we saw in the Northeast with regards to cars being stopped, people's race being checked. I mean, my view is that these are qualitatively much worse than the riots of 2011. Of course, somebody perhaps on the right might disagree, but that's just my view. But it is interesting. So many of these debates, whether it's the legitimacy of political violence, whether it's the use of social media, whether it's the role of the state in curtailing individual freedoms with regards to social media, so many of these, like you say, were in 2011 left coded, and they've been somewhat inverted. But I also think that speaks to a journey that many on the left have been on, Michael. After 2010, 2011, there was a big anti-authoritarian, anti-state left. Of course, remember the rise of Anonymous, the 15M movement in Spain, Occupy. And it is really fascinating to see certain ideas, certain optics move from left to right. And perhaps that's a bad thing for the left, in so much as the idea of an insurgent anti-establishment politics now feels less inherently left-wing, whereas 10 years ago you said those words, you think left-wing. Perhaps now, post-COVID, you're thinking it's a bit more of a right-wing thing. And that's a question, of course, I think people on the left just generally have to sit on. But I really think on the question of social media, many people on the left 10 years ago, myself included, were wrong. I do think you have to have a role for the state to oversee these things. I've always said, to my credit, the one thing I've always said is that if you're going to have a regulator for the press and for TV, you need to have something approaching a regulator for social media too. The extent that, Michael, before the last general election, there are certain rules with regards to TV on how much coverage you're giving each party, but that didn't apply to Novara Media, even though we have a YouTube channel of now more than 800,000 people. At the next general election, if we have a YouTube channel of 3 million people, it strikes me as strange that we're in no way regulated with regards to party political coverage. Of course, we at Novara have voluntarily chosen to be regulated by an organization called Impress, but we don't have to be. So I think this is it's an opportunity to talk about media regulation as well as social media regulation. And that's particularly important, Michael, in the context of, look, yes, of course, Telegram has played a major role, Twitter or X has played a major role. Legacy media has too. Let's not ignore that.
Yeah, I mean, on the comparison sort of between the left approach to these far-right riots and, say, the 2011 riots, I mean, I totally agree with you that I think objectively, whatever your politics, it's worse. It's an aggravating factor. And we admit this in law, right? It's a crime that is an aggravated factor to a crime if it is motivated by racial hatred, right? So I think it's very easy to say whatever your politics, it is worse to take part in a racist riot than a riot which isn't involved in racism. That's just the nature of sort of saying this is an aggravating factor. I think also a difference between the riots of 2010, 2011 and these riots are quite specifically targeting members of the public, right? So it is going after places of worship, going after hotels because of the people who are in them. Whereas I don't think that was a feature of the 2011 riots. I do at the same time, though, I agree with you, Aaron, which is basically, I think as I've, got older, I now feel less relaxed about riots than I used to. And I think my approach to those riots in sort of 2010, 2011, sort of thinking of them as the voice of the unheard, I think now I feel like you probably shouldn't burn things down, whatever your cause. And I think that's probably a development which many on the left have gone through as well. The far-right riots across England and Northern Ireland have been an early test for Keir Starmer. So how has he fared? And what about his rivals? Well, Starmer was relatively quick off the bat to call the riots far-right fuggery, but he was criticised for being slow to speak out against racism specifically, and specifically that was on the weekend when the most serious rioting was taking place. He then told his MPs and councillors not to attend the anti-fascist demonstrations that finally seemed to turn the corner on the dark few days experienced in Britain. Nonetheless, John Rentoul seems to think he's passed the test. Rentoul is a Tony Blair's stan, really, and political editor of The Independent, and he seems to think that Starmer's done, a fairly decent job. So he says this: the big picture is that the Prime Minister has made a stand and spoke for the vast majority of the nation that regards the violence as inexcusable. The prominence of his leadership was enhanced by the absence of the leader of the opposition. Conservative Home, the voice of the Tory grassroots, demanded to know, where is Sunak? Its writer, William Atkinson, said he was Britain's first ethnic minority prime minister. He is the most eloquent and prominent advocate for a successful multiracial Britain this country has yet produced. Does he not have anything to say? Rentoul says it turned out that having made a statement at the weekend saying the police have our full support to deal with these criminals swiftly and they must face the full weight of the law, Sunak was on holiday in California, and the Mirror has a photo of him and Akshata at a restaurant in Beverly Hills. So Sunak hasn't really impressed many people. Meanwhile, Starmer may have passed his first test. It was an unforeseen crisis that played to his strengths, having been Director of Public Prosecutions at the time of the 2011 riots, a bit like, although on a smaller scale, Gordon Brown dealing with the financial crash. Of course, it would be playing to his strengths if what you want is a law and order response, which is the response which Starmer has given. He hasn't given so much of a political response about racism. Lots of people upset about that. I think they could have been a lot stronger on the anti-racist angle. At the same time, I'm not surprised that Starmer has sort of taken the lines he has. He is a politician who doesn't like to take risks. It's also fair to say he's not the Labour politician who has come out worst this week. That's an award that goes to the newly elected MP for Aldershot. She posted this video on Saturday.
We must not let the events of this week divide our community. I know that many residents have been shocked and concerned about the scenes at Potter's International Hotel on Wednesday evening when a police officer was injured. The behaviour that led to that was completely unacceptable, and I have been liaising with the police all this week as their investigation has continued. Many people have said to me that scenes like this happen because people do not feel listened to. Well, I am listening. I've been working on the issues that we inherited on asylum accommodation every day since I was elected last month. I have met with the Immigration Minister to voice our community's concerns about the plans for Pinehurst Hillside, a scheme that was brought in by Conservative ministers under a cloak of secrecy and has not been thought through, and I continue to oppose this scheme. I've also met with resident groups on this issue, including representatives of Rushmore First, who have been organising peaceful protests on this issue for many months. I know that there is a further protest planned on Sunday, and I have been liaising with the police, who are in dialogue with the organisers to make sure that that protest can happen safely. If you are planning to go to the protest this weekend, I know you will want to do so peacefully, to cooperate with the police, and to be vigilant for anyone who is there to exploit this issue for their own agenda. As your MP, I will continue to work with you and with all residents to overcome these issues together.
Now, as well as being one of the most awkward videos I've ever seen posted to Twitter, the message there was extraordinary, right? So that was posted on Saturday. So if you remember, the Southport riots sort of happened on Tuesday. It was a situation where you had bricks being thrown at mosques, right? All week, you had situations with very explicit, racist, far-right riots going on. And this MP, there's a campaign in her constituency against a sort of a development which will be housing for asylum seekers. Now, whether or not, as an MP, you want that in your constituency is up to you. Fair enough. Meet people who are disagreeing with that. But for your video on the Saturday after a week of far-right riots, to not mention anything about racism, to say, I understand why this has happened. It's because you're not being listened to. And by the way, there's a protest on Sunday. Maybe you want to go to it. But this was the weekend. I mean, I assume she filmed and uploaded that before the hotels were set on fire. But she posted that on the morning of Saturday. And that is the weekend where hotels housing asylum seekers around the country were literally, smashed in and set on fire, right? And it wasn't that much of a surprise that happened because there was a wave of far-right riots that had been happening the week before, right? And for a Labour politician to have put up that, and I really do think actually that if that had been a Reform politician, you would have seen lots of people sort of on the Starmer right wing of the party saying this is outrageous. This is someone who seems to be, I'm not saying she was endorsing the riots, but I mean, she said, I feel like she kind of said more nice things about the people, on these protests than bad things. Very, very, very bizarre. Another Labour politician who's come out very badly this week, and this man will pay for it dearly, was Dartford councillor Ricky Jones. Jones was filmed making a speech saying, "These are all disgusting Nazi fascists, and we need to cut all their throats." He has now been arrested for public order offences. That was an incredibly stupid. But when I saw that video shared by Nigel Farage, he was on the demo. Obviously that really inspiring, peaceful demo in Walthamstow, really bringing people together against far right thugs. Like going to that and taking a microphone and saying something as horrendous and stupid as that. I mean, I think people are right to be angry at that guy. Absolutely, he should have been immediately suspended from the Labour Party as he was, and it's no surprise that he's been arrested. Beyond, though, these wildly inappropriate responses from these two Labour politicians, does Labour as a party have a political strategy to respond to far-right riots? Well, Politico says the party will principally be relying on Starmer's key aide, Morgan McSweeney. They write this. People around McSweeney say his formative political experience was wiping out the British National Party on the local Barking and Dagenham Council. The experience in defeating the far-right moulded his view of how to win back working-class voters by addressing concerns about community decline. Labour MPs and strategists have said it will be up to McSweeney to create a political narrative that addresses the concerns of people in these areas while also attacking the genuine far-right thugs who have caused mayhem on Britain's streets. One McSweeney ally said it's simply about, quote, doing the basics right, like improving economic growth and public services for deprived areas, while also being really, really proactive in communicating that. Aaron, we've seen some unambiguously terrible interventions from Labour MPs. From Starmer, I mean, I suppose a bit more on the fence than we're hearing from what Morgan McSweeney's plans might be. What do you make of sort of the Labour Party's approach to the far-right riots we've witnessed?
Well, that excerpt you just read is completely insane. Doing the basics right, like economic growth and public services. If it was so basic, the economy wouldn't be stagnant for the last 15 years in terms of GDP per capita. Productivity has not moved in this country since 2008. Okay, it's actually 16 years, isn't it? So doing the basics right, it's so simple. And by the way, we had massive race riots in this country in 2001. Actually, the economy at that point was flourishing. The point is, where is the economy flourishing and for who? If you look at places like Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Hull, Rotherham, it's going to be more than just a little bit of GDP growth, national 3% GDP growth. These countries have seen economic inertia decline, underinvestment for 50, 60 years. I mean, arguably some parts of the country, like the Northeast, comparative decline to the rest of the country for a century, right? You had bits of the Northeast really holding on because of mining. But actually, there's an argument for Newcastle and that part of the world in terms of armament production, shipbuilding. I mean, it's been on a downward trajectory for a very, very long time. So the basics, right? I mean, if it was that simple, then we wouldn't be waiting 16 years with zero, productivity growth. So that is frustrating. Although I appreciate to some extent the argument that people's lives need to be better, living standards need to improve, public services need to be invested in order to ameliorate some of this anger, because decline is very real. Decline is very real in many parts of the country. Regional inequality is a massive part of this. And yes, that's obviously part of how you resolve a lot of this going forward. In terms of the MP in Aldershot, I mean, just what a coward, Michael. Labour haven't won Aldershot in about 100 years. It's informally known as the home of the British Army. And so, of course, there are many left-wing veterans. And I would never say that, people who've served in the armed forces are all right-wing. That's simply not true. Some of my best friends are veterans. But presumably, on her part, there's a political calculation going on that she can't really defend the rights of refugees to not be burnt alive. I don't know. And more importantly, or just as importantly, Aldershot, although it's predominantly white, I think it's about 75% white. You've still got about a quarter of the people that live in Aldershot being of Asian or African, Afro-Caribbean heritage, black or brown. And she's basically not talking to those people. And of course, they're proportionally far more likely to vote for the Labour Party. I appreciate not wanting to pour, proverbial fuel on the fire. I appreciate that. You want to calm things down. And actually, yes, people have the right to protest, even if it's despicable. And I don't really think it's ever appropriate, least of all right now. I appreciate all that. But to have said absolutely nothing about pogroms and the nature of what's going on, I think you're absolutely right, Michael. It's not just, if that was a Reform MP, Labour would be attacking them. The content of what she said, there's literally nothing to signal that she's a Labour MP. There's literally nothing. Not a word. Right? Not a syllable. Not an utterance. If a Reform MP had said that, I would be surprised. I would think, wow, this is the right wing of Reform. This is the conservative reactionary wing of Reform. But no, actually, she's a Labour MP, and that's concerning. That's really concerning, because we're not talking about something which is about he said, she said, or it's contentious. You need to have a very clear firewall on racially targeted harassment and violence, which is what we've seen. And if a Labour MP can't do that, then she's probably in the wrong job. Ironically enough, her former job before this, you would have thought that given Labour made this huge hoo-ha about having ex-service personnel as parliamentary candidates ahead of the last election, you'd think that somebody in Aldershot would be ex-service personnel, ex-army. She's not. I think her last big job was working in the regeneration of Bastani Power Station, where she worked as Director of Communities and Sustainability. So she loves communities, except when it's brown and black people in her own constituency.
Nigel Farage and Reform have very explicitly flirted with the far-right riots that have terrorised Britain these past 2 weeks. And Farage has faced serious charges of helping to incite the first riot in Southport by saying this.
I have to say there are one or two questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us.
And Nigel Farage because obviously he's talking complete bullshit there, very inflammatory bullshit. He went on to LBC to say, I was just saying what Andrew Tate said on Twitter, as if that's some kind of defense. Like, complete idiot. The party's deputy leader has also defended the far-right rioters against the charge that they are far-right. So this is Richard Tice. Many millions of concerned British citizens are furious at lawless Britain, children being slaughtered, machete mobs abound, soldiers being stabbed, police violently attacked in airport. Instead of empathy, Keir Starmer labelled folks as far-right, out of touch, clueless. So this is people who, again, throwing bricks at mosques, right? I think at the time he tweeted this, they hadn't yet set fire to hotels, but they had already, punched Asian men in the street for being Asian and broken residential windows and, as I say, thrown missiles at places of worship and, injured a lot of cops, right? So he's still saying these people deserve empathy. Flirting with rioters, though, might not have done the party that many favours. It clearly comes with risks. Nigel Farage's popularity has taken a big hit this week, especially among Tory voters. Farage, as you can imagine, still incredibly popular among Reform voters, but among Tory voters, his approval is down from -10 to -27. It's quite a big drop for a week. And among all Britons, his support is down from -35 to -42. You can, though, also see why they might have been walking a bit of a tightrope when it comes to sort of holding their coalition together. This is from The Economist. So it's sort of asking members of the public, based on their party affiliation, how they would describe the rioters, essentially. And they've said thugs. So the vast majority of British people in general think the rioters were thugs. So for Labour and Lib Dems, it's 80%. For the Tories, it's nearly 70%. But only 40% of Reform voters think they're thugs. Again, the vast majority think they're rioters, but under 50% of Reform voters do. Racist is probably where you've got the biggest gap between Reform voters and everyone else. So 50% of Tories think they're racists, almost 80% of Labour and Lib Dem voters think they're racist, but only 20% of Reform voters do. And interestingly, sort of going back to this Richard Tice tweet, only 20% of Reform voters think these people are far right. Aaron, what do you think about how Reform have played this? I know at the general election, we were sort of saying how significant it was for the first time to have 5 MPs from a sort of far-right party or a right-wing populist party, however you want to talk about it, but sort of MPs who play by a different set of rules. How have you sort of assessed their behaviour over the past week or so?
There's two answers to that question, really. The first is, what's the ceiling with Reform? You know, do they want to be a party to the right of the Conservatives with, say, 20 or 30 MPs at the next election? Is that what they want? If it is, then maybe this is an appropriate strategy. And of course, like with any coalition, there are differences within that coalition, of course. If that's the ceiling, no problem. If they want to replace the Conservative Party as the party of the British centre-right all the way through to the radical right, which is what they claim to want, Ben Habib has told me the ambition is to destroy the Conservatives. Richard Tice has told me the same. Farage says the same. They want to destroy the Conservatives. Well, you're not going to replace the Conservative Party if you can't be seen as a party of law and order, you know. You had a lot of people still vote Conservative in this general election. I think, 6.5 million. Obviously, it's historically low for the Conservatives, but there's a lot of votes up for grabs if you're Reform, who, of course, got just over 4 million. If they want to grab a couple of million of those votes off the Tories the next time of asking, they have to be viewed as a party of law and order. You cannot be viewed as sympathetic to or legitimising people who are attacking the police. I mean, it's extraordinary that anyone would think otherwise. I think, to his credit, Nigel Farage knows that, hence he's pulled punches. Of course, his big mistake in all of this was initial with that video where, he said that there were questions to ask. I'm just asking questions. That favoured phrase by conspiracy theorists. Maybe this is all a false flag. This particular shooting, it never really happened. The moon landing is fake. Elvis is still alive. I'm just asking questions. Well, look, you're an MP, Nigel. We only have 650 of them, so it's a pretty important job. You can get away with asking certain questions if you are a TV presenter, big on Instagram, but you're not going to get away with asking questions if you're a member of Parliament. You will be held to a higher standard. And there's a part of me that thinks that Reform and Farage haven't quite yet adapted to that new reality.
Let's talk about another sort of development in public opinion, because the vast majority of Britons do not like far-right rioters, right? They're not popular. That means, I think, sort of allying with them to some degree, even tacitly, from Reform is a mistake. However, there might be a silver lining for the more general electoral right in Britain and a concern for the left. And it's this. So according to YouGov, immigration and crime have both increased as issues the public think are the most important facing the country. So in mid-July, 41% of the public said immigration was one of their top priorities. That's now up to 51%. I think it's now the number one issue. Crime has moved in the same direction as an issue. So in mid-July, 20% of people named this as one of their top 3 priorities. That's now up to 39%. Aaron, I suppose we've, in a way, a very different context, I suppose it's very much an open question, but sort of when we talk about things such as Extinction Rebellion, say, what you often see in opinion polls is that people hate the protesters. People absolutely, they despise people who are stopping people going down the road. But what you see at the same time is the salience of climate change massively increases. And, as we've often said on this show, I consider that a win. So I'm not really someone who anymore, maybe I did in my past, I'm not really someone who blocks buses. I can see the downsides to it. But clearly the positive outcome for progressives or people who want to live in a planet which isn't burning up from Extinction Rebellion is that even though the public didn't like the protest worked in the sense that it increased the salience of those issues. Is there a danger, and should people be worried that these riots, while everyone hates the rioters, that the issues which can we even say they're raising issues because they're a bunch of thugs? But, obviously they have some concerns. I don't think their concerns are legitimate, but they have political positions, let's say, and the salience of those is increasing.
So the two issues which have seen their salience fall are broadly viewed as advantageous to the Labour Party. Those are, of course, the economy at the moment, because the Tories were calamitous on that, but also, of course, the NHS. So the salience of both of those is down. I think that's what you're saying there is true, by the way. There is a counter argument. You could say, well, issue salience of the NHS is lower. It's fallen because it's summertime. That's one thing, right? I suspect there's a longer term trend of issue salience with regards to NHS going up in the winter, falling somewhat in the summer. Labour have been elected into office on the presumption by many that they'll improve the NHS. And then on the economy, we've had an interest rate cut. There's a sense that the cost of living crisis now is behind us. Inflation is lower. We had, by the way, the first interest rate cut in 4 years last week. Inflation of the kind we saw 18 months ago, 2 years ago, is very much in the rearview mirror. That's not to say everybody's loving life. Life's easy. The economy's booming. But there is a sense that the worst is behind us. And again, in addition to that, perhaps the expectation that Labour will make life a little bit easier on the economy from people that voted for them. So I think there's 2 points to that. The answer there, Michael. I think you're partly right. I think that riots around a particular issue or massive political action around a particular issue often raises the salience of that. More people, for instance, after the 2011 riots, over the longer term, were prone to not have trust in the police, reply that the police are racist or that they're incompetent. And I think that's part of the story here. But I also just do think that the salience of the NHS was inevitably going to fall, and the economy also going to fall, particularly after that interest rate cut. If in the months since the general election we'd had a massive oil price spike and inflation went up and there was doom and gloom everywhere with regards to the economy, I think that probably wouldn't have happened. So the answer is a bit more complicated, but I think on principle you're right. Often contentious action, whether that's protests, whether that's riots, whether that's Extinction Rebellion, which I view as legitimate, or what we've seen in the last week, which is entirely illegitimate. I think you're right. Often people can hate what's happening. They can even say, lock those people up. And yet it does clearly at a mass level shift the dial in the favor of those people who are the subject of so much enmity and anger.
I suppose, again, if you are watching this and you're more of a right-wing persuasion, you're sort of like, how can Aaron say that Extinction Rebellion is legitimate and these riots aren't? I mean, regardless of your politics. So I think it's legitimate to say you want more climate action. I agree. I think it's also legitimate to say you want lower migration, right? I don't personally. I'm very happy with living in a very diverse, multicultural society. I think it's good for the economy. But I think it's a legitimate position to want it to be lowered. If those are your positions, I think it is legitimate to sort of, block some traffic if you want and say, I'm annoyed about this. It's not legitimate to target people because of who they are, right? It's not legitimate to throw bricks at places of worship. It's not legitimate to burn down hotels while people are in them. So there's this charge that sort of, the left are all hypocrites because they say direct action is fine if the motive is left wing, but not if it's right wing. Well, I think direct action is fine if it's directed at the state or if it's on a policy issue. But if it's directed at members of the public for who they are, then I think it's wrong, regardless of your politics. I hope that's sort of relatively clear. The general election saw the highest number of independent MPs elected in modern history, and 5 of those 6 MPs could now join forces. Jeremy Corbyn and Shaukat Adam are among those in talks to form a new group of independents who ran on a pro-Palestine platform. Joining them would be Ayub Khan, Adnan Hussein and Iqbal Mohammed. Adam, who unseated Labour's Jonathan Ashworth, who hasn't left the TV screen since, says the group are, quote, looking at options that would give us more access to the levers of power. And Corbyn has said this: I was elected by my constituents to speak out against the genocide in Gaza, against child poverty and against the demonisation of migrants and refugees. I am proud to work alongside my fellow independent colleagues to make sure our constituents' voices are heard. This country is demanding real change, and the more MPs who are prepared to stand up for international law, defend refugees and oppose the far right, the better. The new alliance would leave behind former DUP leader Alex Easton. The now independent MP for East Downs is reportedly not part of discussions, which isn't much of a surprise. Aaron, how big a deal is this if we get the independent group? Obviously, the last independent group was with Joan Ryan and the people to the right of the Labour Party. I presume these guys will come up with a different name, but would it matter?
Oh, yeah, it could matter. And I think what's really key there, Michael, is Corbyn offering an itemised list of the things that really matter to him: migrants, opposition to war. And you can see a very minimal political programme, solidarity with refugees, anti-racism, anti-austerity, a pro-peace, anti-war foreign policy. Not hugely expansive. You don't even need to talk about things like climate change, etc. Obviously, I think you should, but you can imagine a quite limited sort of platform that those independents can share, and that perhaps other independents who lost this time round but might be looking to win again next time, like Liam Mohammed, for instance, in Ilford North. I think that would be quite powerful. Now, why are they doing this? If they are a group with a leader, etc., I presume they'll get short money of some kind. You're talking potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds. And again, if they run as some sort of coalition at the next election and they win MPs again and they get a decent share of the vote, there's short money involved. I don't know the specifics of that, but there is potentially financial upside in terms of being able to formulate policy, hire people, etc., which is good if you want to advance your politics. Those are all positive things. So it's certainly an interesting shift. I suppose the question is, how broad would the political platform be? I mentioned climate change a moment ago. Somebody like Lutfur Rahman, I think, fantastic politician. I think he's brilliant. I think he's very good. I agree with him on things like, for instance, free school meals, investment into young people and social housing in Tower Hamlets. I probably disagree with him on LTNs. So I would be really curious about how broad that platform is. I think keeping it minimal, like I say, solidarity with refugees, anti-war, anti-austerity, I think that would be a really interesting prospectus moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Short money, that's the money that sort of you can get from the public purse to hire researchers and the like once you're represented in Parliament. And as you say, you sort of get more if you're a party, don't you, than if you're an independent. Let's wrap up there. I'm going to rest my voice. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
My pleasure, Michael. No more Marlboros for you this weekend. God knows how that happened.
I am actually a non-smoker. I just have I have sort of repeated problems with my throat. Thank you everyone for watching this evening. We'll be back from 6 on Monday. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.